Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I leave the hardware store and deliver an episode to you while I walk home. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good afternoon, listeners. It is still a gloomy day here in suburban Chicago. Should have said good morning. It's about 10 o'clock. And it's a cloudy day on the 1st of December. I just finished recording my Top of the Stack episode. I stopped into the hardware store and now I'm on my way home. If I time this right, this episode will be on December 2nd. Then my plan is to, in the next couple days, record 2 more Shooting from the Hip episodes that will be December 4th and maybe December 6th. I'll intersperse them with an episode about something else. But over the next week or so, I'm going to be catching up on my first impressions of a bunch of games that I played here at the end of November. That's right, you heard me right. Right now, this very moment, I'm starting Shooting from the Hip, triple shot. So today I'm going to talk about 3 games that I played actually just before Thanksgiving at Toggle Game Club with a couple friends, and 1 game that I played just after. So the first game I wanted to talk about, I heard a couple good reviews of, and one person compared it very favorably to Just One, and so I decided to order it right away in time to have it for Thanksgiving, and I'm sure glad I did. And that is So Clover from Repos Productions. So Clover is a word game, a collaborative word game in the spirit of Just One or Codenames. Although in Codenames you have teams and you're sort of battling with one another. In Just One, you are in So Clover. Sorry, in Codenames you have teams and you're battling against one another. In So Clover, you are working with the other people at the table in order to solve the problem. So it's more like Just One in that regard, which makes sense since Repos Productions is the producer, and they also are the people who make Just One. So Clover, like I said, it's a word game. It does a couple things that are interesting that kind of solve some problems of Just One and Codenames. Not to bury the lead or not spoil anything, but I would say this game is not quite as good as Just One, but it's awfully good. And there's some really interesting stuff involved in the game that I think make it worth checking out. Here's how the game works. Each person gets a plastic clover that is a 4-leaf clover, of course, and that has these 4 spaces in the middle that are square. You also get dealt 4 cards that are square. And each card has a square cutout that matches the size of those spaces. So you can put the cards onto your plastic clover and you can arrange them in one of the 4 spots. And you can rotate the cards so that you can decide what orientation they have. The reason that part is important is that each card on each of the 4 sides of the square has a word that's written there. And when you're arranging your 4 cards in the clover, you're deciding which word is going to go where and how are they going to pair up. And the idea is that when you arrange your cards in this grid, you're going to write a clue on each leaf of the 4-leaf clover, and the clue is going to tell people, is going to connect to the 2 words that are on that side. Now, those words aren't necessarily related to each other, and the clue doesn't necessarily have to connect them. The clue has to do with the 2 words in some way. But of course, you're arranging 4 cards, so you have 4 sides and 4 pairs of words that you're making that connection with. As you do so, or once you've done so, then you take the cards off the grid, so they're not connected to the words directly. And then you're going to add 1 more card from the draw pile into the cards that you drew, and then you're going to shuffle those up. So each person is doing this all at the same time. So if you're playing a 5-player game, it plays up to 6, 5 people with 5 plastic clovers and 5 sets of 4 cards that are arranging them, writing clues on them, and drawing 1 extra and shuffling it in. And then you take it in turns, going around the table to show off your clover, lay out the 5 cards that you have in your stack, the 4 that you had and the 1 more that you added. And then you have to sit silently and, rage internally as your teammates fail to figure out what it was you were trying to get at when you gave them the clue that you gave them. It's a delicious little thing to wrestle with because just like in Codenames or just like in Just One, you can see the connection because you know the answer. But hearing their logic about why they connect some things or don't connect others is really interesting and really fun. If they get it right on the first try, if they arrange all 4 cards in the correct arrangement, they get a 2-point bonus plus 1 point for each card they got right. And then if they get any wrong, they don't get the 2-point bonus. You pull the cards that are wrong off, and then they rearrange them again, and then they just get 1 point for every card that's right at the end. So in a 5-player game, the most you can score is 6 points per Clover, so your maximum team score would be 30 points for a round. And that's it. Kind of like Just One, Codenames is a little more competitive, but kind of like Just One, the score doesn't really matter. The point is to give clues and have fun trying to figure them out. So Clover is difficult. It is a little harder than something like Just One because you're wrestling with 2 words and trying to find a way to connect them. And the decision space is more complicated because you have these 4 cards, each of which has 4 sides, and you get to arrange them in the grid to make the pairs. So it can be a little paralyzing, the decision to try to get that set up and then make a clue. At the same time, everybody is wrestling with that problem at the same time. So it does solve one of the problems that both Just One and Codenames face, which is the problem of people sitting quietly while they wait for someone else to figure out a puzzle. There's almost none of that in this game because in the beginning, when you're all coming up with the puzzle, you're all doing it at the same time. So you're all working on something. Admittedly, some people will finish ahead of others, so there'll be a little downtime, but it's not like in Codenames where 3/4 of the table or more are sitting quietly while they're waiting for the clue giver to come up with a clue. Secondly, once the round starts, each person presents their clue and everybody else participates in the conversation about it. And so again, not that there's not downtime the way there is with some of the other games. So from that perspective, So Clover is really interesting. I think ultimately it's a little bit harder to play. It's a little paralyzing, all the choice that you get, which means that the accessibility that something like Just One has is a little more limited in So Clover. But it's still just as accessible, if not more so, than Codenames, which I think people find even harder. So definitely worth a go if you get a chance. The price is pretty cheap. It's like $15. So I would even say it's worth a gamble. If it sounds like a game you'd like, you probably will like it. So that's So Clover. The next game I want to talk about, I played at Toggle Gaming, and this is Ra the Dice Game. Now, I've heard Ra reviewed a number of times on a number of different podcasts. It's the subject of discussion often when people talk about Reiner Knizia's best games, and it sounds like a game I would not like at all. So I have not sought it out or played it, but it regularly gets a lot of acclaim for its quality, and I believe them. So Ra the Dice Game, as far as I can tell, having not played Ra but heard about it quite a bit, has almost nothing to do with the game of Ra other than the theme. So the theme in Ra the Dice Game is that you are, doing something with Egyptian symbols, and you're trying to collect points. Like a classic Stefan Feld game, your player board has a number of different ways to keep track of points, and the points score in different ways based on how many times you have scored in a particular category. On your turn, you get these 5 colored dice with different symbols on each side. There's a wild symbol and then 5 different symbols. You're going to roll the dice, and the symbols that you get will dictate which categories of your player board you can advance on, and each category scores in a slightly different way. Now, like many games like this, you don't just roll the dice one time. You get a Yahtzee style 3 rolls. You can leave some, pick them all up, roll again, leave some, pick them all up, roll again. And once you've rolled that 3rd time, then whatever you have left is you're stuck with. Now, there is one die face. It's a sun. If you roll that, it gets set aside. You can't re-roll that. But if you roll 3 of them, then you get a bonus instead of a negative. Otherwise, every sun that people roll advances the timing marker. And when the timing marker reaches the end of the track, that's when the game is scored. If you roll 3 suns, the timing marker does not advance and you get some points instead. Like I said, there are like 5 different ways to score points, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but there are variations on like set collection or majorities or combos of various things, and it's a fine amusement. I had a good time playing it. I doubt I would ever say no if somebody got it out and said, hey, I'm really in the mood for Ra the Dice Game. You want to play? Sure, I'll play. It was fine. That said, it definitely feels a bit older. The theme is entirely absent. It really could have just been symbols, and it would have worked fine. It also fails to connect to the story in a way that helps you understand what's going on either. There's really no justification for one game working the way it does and another game working the way it does within these sort of mini games that you score in. And frankly, the dice are just brutal. You know, when I play Elder Sign, which is another game that I have played regularly that has this sort of Yahtzee mechanism, you generally know exactly what you're aiming for, and the game comes with a lot of luck mitigation stuff. There are cards you can get, there are skills you can use, and admittedly, Elder Sign is meant to be hard, and sometimes you just fail because the dice failed you. In Ra, the dice game, your score is based on how well you did in acquiring certain symbols, but you, of course, have no control over whether you get those symbols, right? It's entirely about pushing your luck, and from that perspective, it's often, there's no decision to be made. On your first roll, if you get 2 of a certain face, most of the games having more of that face is better. So there's almost never a reason to not re-roll the rest of the dice with the attempt of getting more of that one face that you got 2 of. It felt fine. Not a game I would seek out to buy. Not a game I would probably ask to play again. But if somebody said, hey, Brendan, I'm playing this. Do you want to join? Sure. So that's Ra, the dice game. It was fine. I believe Rainer Knizia is the designer of that one. I don't know who published it. Maybe Rio Grande. I want to say Rio Grande, but I don't know. The third game I got to try at this time was Yedo Master Set. Now, this is a game I had not planned to play. I showed up at Toggle without a plan, just planning to join whomever was around. And the person who was around, one of the people who was around, was setting up Yedo Master Set. Now, this is a game I'd heard about. I heard it was pretty cool. The Yedo Master Set is a beautiful piece of game artifact. It's lovely to look at. The pieces are all snazzy. And so, yeah, I'm in. Let's play Yedo Master Set. The teach was great. I felt like I understood how the game worked for the most part. Ultimately, it wasn't really for me. I enjoyed my play fine. I'm glad to have tried it. Okay, so let me give you a sense of how it works. Each round, there are a number of phases. There's a bidding phase where you're bidding to take control of one of these, these area of actions, and the actions get you various kinds of things, and those are the best way to get those things. So, like for example, if you need a new worker, you could pay, I think, 5 to get a new worker during the bidding phase, or 11 to get a new worker if you actually went to the worker space. So the bidding phase was useful to try to get into that working spot, but of course you had to pay to then take that bidding action. So anyway, so there are a variety of those. And then after the bidding phase, there's an action placement where you're putting out your workers on these spaces, but you don't take the actions yet. And then these guards move around and they'll capture people sometimes if you're not careful. And then you get to take actions. And this part's interesting. You either pick the worker up and take one of the actions related to the space where you'd place the worker, and generally there's 2 or 3 different actions you could do, or you can accomplish a mission, and all of the missions have requirements about people in certain places. So if one of the missions you have might require that you have a couple weapons and a resource and a person in the market. And sometimes they'll require 2 people, a person in the market and a person at the palace, but you always have to remove at least one of them as part of payment to do the mission, which means that you don't then get to do the action for that space, which is an interesting choice to have to make. Although usually it's not really a choice because you have to finish the mission, and so you had to send somebody there. The mission, when you finish it, goes in your finished mission pile, and it usually gives you some more resources. If it's a lower level mission or if it's a higher level mission, it will give you more resources and then some points. So here's the misstep for me in a couple ways. One, there were a lot of different things you might need to complete a mission. So there's a lot of different resources that you have to kind of keep track of, and they're all in limited supply. So there might be times, like toward the end of the game, I drew a mission, for instance, that needed 2 geisha, and I only had 1, and there weren't any more. So I just can't complete that mission. So sometimes you would draw a mission that you just can't possibly accomplish. The other thing I was going to say is the economy feels incredibly tight, and you don't have very many workers. So the challenge of having to give up a worker to do a mission is a pretty rough thing to have to pay. Now, you know me, I like a tight economy. I generally don't mind that as a way to play. I will say here's another places that I found the game really frustrating. The higher level missions, the one that gives you points, almost all of them required rooms, certain rooms that you could build. One of the things you could do is go build a room as an annex off your house. And we were in a 3-player game, and there were 4 different kinds of rooms you can get, but there were 2 of each room. Now, one of the players pretty early on acquired all the rooms. So he had 4 additional rooms attached to his place. which meant he had one of each. So the other player and I had to kind of duke it out for those other two. And I didn't really understand that the high level missions were going to require rooms. So I think I ended up with 2 of them. But the 2 I ended up with were the 2 that were not generally required for those higher level missions. So toward the end of the game, at various points, I do 3 of the really high level missions, 0 of which I had even the possibility of accomplishing because the rooms that I needed had already been taken by other players. So from a new player perspective, that was a little frustrating, being absolutely unable to complete the high level missions, which is where a lot of the points come from. So that part was a little frustrating, but I don't know that in itself was enough to make me say, nah, this game isn't for me. I think the main thing was the overall gameplay was very much Lords of Waterdeep. It felt a lot like that. Now, Lords of Waterdeep is a lighter game for certain, but also much smoother. I felt like Yedo had wrinkles or speed bumps where Lords of Waterdeep had figured out how to make those smooth and accessible. And ultimately, just by the end of the game, I was just like, I would have much rather played Lords of Waterdeep, and I always would. Like, there's nothing in Yedo that would make me want to go back to that over Lords of Waterdeep. I enjoyed my time playing it, and the company at the table was really good. But as far as a game in itself, I can't say that I see why people like that one so much. So I would be interested to hear, if you've played Yedo, what do you like about it? How does it stand out for you? And I'm curious, have you played Lords of Waterdeep, and why do you like one over the other? And I certainly could say some people really like heavier games, and Yedo is definitely heavier than Lords of Waterdeep. So it could just be a level of, well, it's got more crunch to it. Fine. The crunch wasn't exciting or interesting for me, I guess. So that's my first response to Yedo Master Set. And that brings me to the end of my Shooting from the Hip episode and the end of our walk together. So I want to say thank you for joining me today. If you would like to reach out, you can reach out to me, Brendan@rattleboxgames.com, or you could send me a direct message through BoardGameGeek to username Wombat929. I'd enjoy it if you joined the conversation at our guild, 3269, over on BoardGameGeek, and tell us what you think of these games. If you've played them, if you want to play them now, if you're curious because you already had a copy and now I've spoiled you on it, any of those things I'd love to hear. But until next time, thanks for joining me, and I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.